Alright, so what happened to France after the Napoleonic era? Well, first the concert of Europe under Britain, Austria, Russia was involved, essentially the powers who had won the Napoleonic Wars. What they decided was they wanted to maintain the status quo, and so in areas where they had monarchies removed, for example, France and Spain, they then, of course, put the next person in line in those countries, but they wanted them to also be separate, so there wasn't a lineage, for example, between France and Spain. So the monarchy in France is first restored. King Louis XVIII is going to rise to the throne. What he is going to do in 1814 is this is an agreement with the European powers that he has to pass a Bill of Rights for the people. And so that's what he does. It's called the Charter of Liberties of 1814. It passes, he signs this document, and essentially it's a Bill of Rights for the French people. So that is a victory of the French Revolution. This was certainly put into place by Napoleon. It was very popular by the French people, and so they wanted it maintained under the new monarchy. That was pretty much the only liberal law or policy put into place under King Louis XVIII's reign. Pretty much he maintains France for a time. There isn't really a whole lot going on. He's really trying to restore the state and what it was. So there is going to be a legislative body, something like Congress, and they're going to share power. Now, the next king, King Charles X, is going to rise to power in 1824, and he is going to go to 1830. He comes to power due to the death of King Louis XVIII, so it isn't anything violent like the past couple decades. Now, what King Charles X is he's a conservative, and he wants to maintain power in the hands of the king and the monarchy, and he wants to grow the power of certainly the king and the monarchy as well as the nobility and the church. And so that's exactly what he does. He starts removing powers from the general public and the legislative. So it starts to look like King Charles X is going to return things to the way things were with King Louis XIV, XV, and XVI, for example, and potentially in more recent history with Napoleon. In July 1830, those fears come to fruition because he collapses the Charter of Liberties, the Bill of Rights, and he removes the legislature, essentially Congress. Now what happens is there's going to be a revolution. This revolution is going to have general lower class citizens and the middle class basically grabbing weapons, and basically you have a reintroduction of what the French Revolution was, except you don't have the wide-scale killing. King Charles X is going to try to maintain power, but also to maintain peace. But he's not going to be very successful in that. If you're curious, if you've ever watched the movie or the play Les Mis, this is the period of history in which that takes place, at least a later portion of it. If you watch or see in live action that depiction, you have the French Revolution at first, and then towards the end you have this revolution against Charles X. So eventually he is going to decide he cannot do anything about this revolt, and so as a result he's going to abdicate, meaning he is going to release his powers as king, and he is going to leave the country. And so the liberal movement is going to offer the crown to Louis Philippe. He's going to be the new king of France, at least for the remainder of this portion, at least until we get to the 1850s. What he's going to do is he is going to expand voting for the middle class. What the situation was in France is you had to own a certain amount of property to vote. That may be to elect a representative for the legislator. And so the restriction on how much property you had, at least at the time that he came in, was basically the nobility, the very wealthy, were able to vote. Now he's going to expand that to the middle class. And this rubbed the lower class the wrong way because they were certainly instrumental in removing Charles X. They did not have the right to vote, and so their reward for removing King Charles X was not on par with what they were expecting. They were expecting maybe widespread voting rights, something similar to what the Americans had in the United States at the time, but that was not to be. So they were very disappointed with the results. What Louis Philippe is going to do next is he's going to encourage economic work. He's going to try and improve the industry. And so around this time is when you start to see the Industrial Revolution hit France. In the end, you have France returning to power. The political system is still relatively unstable, but for the most part, it's a bit more stable than what the situation was in certainly Napoleonic times. The lower class are a little disenfranchised with the new monarchy and the new system because they do not have the right to vote or be involved in the political process whatsoever, but the upper class and middle class does. And so that's going to open a way eventually for certainly the middle class to encourage the lower class to have more rights and freedoms, but that's going to come much later down the road. Unfortunately, with this Industrial Revolution, much as what was depicted in that section, was there were a lot of injuries due to equipment. There were any sort of safety procedures, and so in France there was a lot of death, a lot of unemployment. Health was not the primary concern, and so that's going to be the next thing that's tackled in France, but that's going to be coming to the later portions of the 1800s. So that's kind of the scene of France, at least from about the end of the Napoleonic era till about 1850.